Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Shankar Shastri, the Dean of the College of Engineering, and I'm delighted to welcome Lisa Davis, who is the CEO of Siemens USA and the member of the managing board of the big Siemens, all of the Siemens in Munich. And she is the first speaker in our View from the Top series for the fall term. This series gives the campus community a chance to hear from leading thinkers on technology and industry innovation. I'd like to thank the Berkeley student chapter of SWE, the Society for Women Engineers, for co-sponsoring today's lecture. Can I acknowledge you? There they are. And I'm also honored to welcome alumni and members of our Engineering Dean Society here in the front, who are joining us, and some in the back also, for joining us here today. So Siemens has been an engaged and generous partner of Berkeley for over a decade. Faculty collaborations with Siemens researchers exist in a number of our centers and labs and across a wide range of topics, reflecting, of course, the diversity of Siemens. Energy, data analytics, healthcare, and much, much more. Materials, you know, if I started this list, it wouldn't end. The research efforts represent what Berkeley does best, and Siemens does even better, I should say, collaborate across disciplines to tackle issues of global scale. Berkeley is a Siemens CKI, which stands for Center for Knowledge Interchange Partner, one of only 2 universities in the US to hold this distinction. And in recognition of this close and multifaceted relationship, we consider Siemens not only a signature partner of the College of Engineering, but also a great friend. I'm delighted that members of the Siemens team are also here with us today, including Kurt Bettenhausen, Senior Vice President of Corporate Technology, who's given up his seat in honor of our students. So, Arturo Pisano, the Manager of University Relationships, and the Chief of Staff, Carmen Mendez. Where are you, Carmen? Oh, there you are, for Lisa. Siemens will, and several others from Siemens, sorry, Lisa, I know there are more of you from Siemens here. I wanted to use this chance to plug the fact that Siemens will be co-hosting with SWE a networking reception at 4 p.m. today, just outside in the Kwame Atrium, and I'd encourage the college community to join them. And now let me introduce today's speaker. Lisa is a Berkeley alumna, and after she graduated from Berkeley's College of Chemistry, she held a variety of leadership roles at Exxon and Royal Dutch Shell before joining Siemens. Appointed to the Siemens board in August 2014, she is responsible for the company's oil and gas, power generation, and power services businesses for both North and South America. And she was named the chair and CEO of Siemens USA in January 2017. I'd like to thank Lisa and her husband, Brian, who she met here, a mechanical engineering alum. Chemistry and engineering, all good, you know. We're going to build this building together, I gather, so to intermerge our colleges a little better. And I'd like to thank them for being active and engaged supporters of both the colleges, engineering and chemistry. I'm also proud to say that Lisa serves as a member of the Engineering Advisory Board, and we are very grateful for her thoughtful insight and involvement. Thank you for your commitment to the university. And now, please welcome Lisa.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I have to apologize because I have a cold, so I sound a bit funny. So hopefully you can hear me okay and we can have a good discussion. What I wanted to do is, obviously we have a somewhat meaty topic here. So I will just make a few comments about what, from a Siemens perspective, we're seeing in the world of energy. But what I'd really like to do is have this be an engagement. So I'd really like to make sure that we focus on questions and maybe what from the world of academia you're seeing in the same area. To me, the value that we see from Siemens and working with universities like Berkeley is being able to share insights from the industrial world where I live, insights from academia, and how do we work together to solve some of the world's biggest problems. So this is a bit of an engagement for me to learn from you as well. So let me first explain a bit about what I do in Siemens. As the Dean said, I lead the energy business in Siemens. So the energy business in Siemens is about a $35 billion business, if you look at the revenue line. Our focus is around power generation. It's around the entirety of the energy value chain. So power generation, transmission, distribution, oil and gas, and then how do we then take that energy system and evolve into the future. One thing that I'm going to talk about today is how energy systems are changing. And if you look at CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions in the world today, about 30% of today's emissions come from the energy business, the energy system. And so we see today that energy systems are changing in a very dramatic way. They're changing in an effort to decarbonize, to reduce the amount of CO2 emissions, which is absolutely essential. And in doing so, we're seeing energy systems change to where they must be much more flexible. We see new participants in the energy system. We see new technologies coming into the energy system. We see a need to make sure that the energy system is operated much more as a system in the future as opposed to discrete parts. And as you start to get into this systemic thinking, then how do we optimize, how do we leverage data to create the ability to look across the entirety of the system to create value? So it's becoming quite a living environment if you think of an energy system in that sense, as it evolves, changes, and begins to grow. So let me share a few observations with you, and then hopefully this sparks some good questions or dialogue. And I know those people in the front row are going to ask all the questions, right? You got that? All right. First, just a bit about Siemens as a company. So when I went to school at Berkeley, I didn't know Siemens at all. Siemens is a German industrial company, headquartered in Munich, but we are a company that's also present in 200 markets around the world. So we are very much a global business. 2/3 of our 350,000 employees are in geographies outside of Europe, so a very international business as well. Our focus as a technology company is really about innovation. And how do we leverage technology? How do we create new ways of doing business in all of the key areas of activity that we're in, whether it be energy, whether it be healthcare, whether it be mobility, whether it be industrial applications. So the entirety of the industrial space, Siemens is very present in. We're also the leader in industrial automation. So as we start to look at the new world of leveraging data, which we call digitalization in Siemens, which is kind of an odd word and has a definition of varying sorts depending on who you talk to. But our view of leveraging, of digitalization, is being able to leverage data to create value. And we do this through the connectivity that we have with our hardware in the different industrial sectors, but then also through our ability to leverage the software business that we have in Siemens. So Siemens is also a large software business. So that kind of tells you a bit about the company. If you look at the US is our largest market. You can see a few of the statistics there with respect to the presence we have in the US. Obviously, broadly through all the areas of business, energy, healthcare, industry, et cetera, and also contributing in a fairly significant way to our US, to the country, to commerce, et cetera. An example here is that if you look at Siemens equipment, we power 1/3 of the networks, the systems around the US. So a very significant presence in the US itself. If we kind of transition into energy systems, as I mentioned before, we see a lot of change happening in energy systems today. And as we say here on the chart, it's really the dawn of a new era. And we're shifting from primary energy to electricity. This is driven in part by, obviously, the desire to decarbonize our energy systems. If you see population growth, about a 25% increase in population growth over the course of the next 15, 20 years. Also, we continue to see growth in the use of primary energy, so the demand for primary energy. But what's really amazing is if you look at the expected increase in demand for electricity, it's as much as 80%. And this is driven in large part by not only the growth in population and the growth in commerce throughout the world, but also by the fact that today 1.2 billion people do not have access to electricity. So very strong growth in electricity generation, and electricity actually becoming the global source of energy. So how do we produce this electricity, and how do we end up in a world where we're driven to decarbonize electricity? Well, if you look at the energy mix, this tells you how electricity is produced today, and then how we anticipate electricity being produced in the year 2040. And you see the largest growth there, obviously being in renewables. And renewables here are predominantly wind power and solar, and obviously wind and solar being no CO2. So this is where we're getting the decarbonization of the energy system. With the increase, though, in renewables comes a lot of other consequences for the energy system. Because what we see is a lot of the geography or the location for renewables, electricity production via renewables, is typically in remote areas, and more in a decentralized fashion in terms of generating electricity, as opposed to the traditional model of utility-based electricity generation. So with the growth of decentralized energy, decentralized electricity, we also end up introducing a lot of instability, and a lot of change in the energy system overall. So we end up going from a fairly stable energy system of today to a very complex one going forward. And we have to be able to manage that within the energy system that we create. How we manage that is to start looking at the energy system more as an integrated system. As I mentioned in the very beginning, instead of looking at energy as generation, transmission, distribution, consumption, we need to look at it very much as an integrated system and be able to manage that through new technologies, through new ways of doing business. What we show here is fossil fuels and power generation, such as gas-fired power generation, will always be the backbone of our energy system, at least for the foreseeable future. But what we do see also is, as I mentioned, renewables beginning to grow. And renewables are growing because they've really, as it says here, transitioned from kind of idealism to a very competitive business model in today's energy world. You can see the price point here, 3 cents a kilowatt hour, 4 to 5 cents a kilowatt hour. Those are projects being built today in economies around the world that allows us now to have renewable energy that competes on a cost basis with traditional fossil-based power generation. And this is what's allowing renewables to grow. Now, how do you think we've gotten to that low of a cost point in renewables power generation? Well, it's through technology. It's through being able to bring new technologies in for the power generation itself, bringing new technologies into the business through how we then connect those renewables to the grid, how we then manage the grid, because what happens in this environment where you have such a growing percentage of renewables is the system, as I mentioned, becomes very unstable, and now we have to start managing more across transmission and distribution and the system in total to be able to stabilize the volatility that renewables brings into our energy markets. So it creates the need to be able to manage in a smarter way to afford that flexibility and much more of a system thinking to how we manage our energy. This also creates an environment where we have to bring much more technology, an opportunity to bring much more technology into the energy systems, whether it be from generation, transmission, or distribution. And just a few examples here of how in Siemens today, we work hard to bring new technologies into the energy system to allow us to better manage the complexity that renewables and differing types of energy are beginning to create. You know, just to touch on a few, as you look at, for example, the increase in CO2 emissions, technologies like carbon capture and sequestration become much more important. If we look at, as I mentioned before, that our base load in the energy system will always be, at least for the foreseeable future, fossil-generated fuels. We need to then also make sure that as we have gas-fired power generation out there, turbines to generate power via gas, that we make sure that we're introducing as much technology as possible to create the highest efficiency and the lowest emissions. We do a lot of work here with the College of Engineering to look at new materials to be able to leverage in the design of our turbines that allow us then to run those turbines at much higher temperatures which then also allows us to increase the efficiency of that part of the energy chain. Also looking at new and innovative ways to access the grid and to make grid connections because of the growth of renewables. Obviously, a lot of talk in industry about smart grid and how do we bring more intelligence into the grid. If you think about the energy system of today, the grid becomes the focal point of capability. The grid is in a sense, the center of all that happens in this system. And in the past, our grids and energy used to be unidirectional. We'd have generation, transmission, distribution, and then consumption, and it flowed in one direction. In today's environment, with the growth of renewables and the ability to bring multiple sources of generation into the grid, we now have the ability to go bidirectional in the grid. And obviously that requires a different level of intelligence and capability to manage that optimization. Obviously, also a lot of discussion in the industry around energy storage and how do we use energy storage to better manage the intermittency and the volatility of renewable energies. Sector coupling is the ability to convert excess energy, so excess energy from renewables, into other forms of energy for then use later in the cycle. And then obviously virtual power plants, where as we get to more decentralized power, how do we connect all of these decentralized sources and create a virtual power plant and the ability to optimize across that generation, transmission, and distribution. So a lot of opportunity and a lot of need for new technologies in the energy systems. And we work have a great partnership, as the Dean said, with Berkeley, where we work very collaboratively in a number of these areas. For example, as I mentioned, in looking for new materials in gas turbines, in the management of smart grids, and how do we leverage our automation expertise and control technologies to optimize across smart grids. And then also demand response system, where we optimize the demand and consumption challenges in the system itself. So a great partnership with Berkeley that allows us to develop many of these technologies. Also, I mentioned quite a number of times now the importance of the grid. The grid is where we balance the energy system. Here's just a few examples of where we're leveraging some new technologies in the business today to be able to manage this decentralized energy world that's evolving. For example, here with our decentralized energy management system, this is an example of an island in the Mediterranean that's entirely self-sufficient. Generation, consumption, and obviously the grid to manage across that. We do that through our energy management system. Energy IP is an advanced energy system that we leverage within the business to help our retail customers demand response manage and such. And then lastly, blockchain, new business models where when you do have these microgrids set up with multiple consumption and generation sources, they can leverage the business model around that using blockchain. So a number of areas where new technologies and new ways of doing business are influencing the energy system we have today. I say just a few words about what we call digitalization, which I think everybody describes it differently. Industry 4.0, for example, another way to look at it. As I mentioned at the very beginning, Siemens is the leader in industrial automation. So in our network of operations, all of the customers where we leverage our technology, we have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of devices. These devices all have data. And what we're finding in today's environment is, and with the advances in computing technology, is we can now leverage that data much more effectively. So if you look here, this is how we approach what we call then the world of digital. And if you look at, we have all of the connected devices that are in the business. These can be controllers in refineries. These can be gas turbines with thousands of sensors in a power plant. These can be CT scanners in a medical facility. So we have all of these connected devices that we then bring into an open architecture platform. And that platform has advanced analytics. It has intelligence to some extent. And it also has security, obviously, because as you collect this data, security becomes much more important. And then we can leverage that data in that platform to be able to create value. So we leverage that data through creating applications that then sit on this platform that can then calculate or use the advanced analytics to be able to, for example, monitor the pressure gradient in a pipeline. And by having the information around the pressure gradient, the flows in a pipeline, being able to then take that data and optimize the operation of the pumping stations along the pipeline to improve their efficiency and to reduce their emissions. Or to be able to, as was mentioned, my background is largely oil and gas, so I give you a lot of oil and gas examples. But if you look at the top sides of a platform where we produce oil and gas, being able to optimize the entirety of the top sides all the way back to managing the flow from the wells. So, and do it in a fashion that optimizes production for the least amount of energy usage. So we can do this by bringing all of the data into a platform and then being able to leverage analytics to create the value that helps us manage our business. We're also using it to do much more in terms of operations in a remote fashion. So how do we leverage the data and the ability to control and manage difficult areas, for example, difficult locations from a remote base and be able to then have a safer operation. This also allows us to manage across the entirety of the life cycle of either a product or a project, from the initial design phases all the way through to manufacturing and then into operation. So it's not only allowing us to create more data, it's allowing us to be more comprehensive in how we manage data across the life cycle of a piece of our business. So this world of digital becomes much, much more important, not only in managing energy systems, but in managing all of the systems and helping us create value out of the information that we have in our business today. So maybe to summarize, and hopefully this has sparked a few questions or thoughts. The key message, and this won't be a surprise, I don't think, to anybody, is that energy systems in today's environment, today's world, are changing in very, very dramatic ways. And we need to be able to manage that change as we go forward. That change is largely being brought around by the desire and the need to decarbonize our energy systems, to be able to bring higher and higher percentages of renewables into those energy systems around the world. This requires also that new technologies, digitalization, be brought to bear to optimize the energy system. And it also requires that we treat integration, or we treat our energy systems very much as an integrated platform. And we look at them in a very systemic way. So the world of energy changes in a dramatic fashion. One aspect that I haven't mentioned is that this change in energy also allows much more participation in the energy system of tomorrow. And so we all can be participants in that energy system, and we can also play a part in continuing to drive the decarbonization of our energy systems as we go forward by leveraging the technologies that are created in places like this here at Berkeley, and in being able to work together across industry and academia to find that future that allows us to continue to create an energy system, and ideally one of zero CO2 in the future. So that's a bit of a snapshot of what's happening in energy. Hopefully that's given some prompting for questions. And I think Dean Sostre is going to answer all the difficult questions.
It's wonderful. You've given us a little time for Q&A. So I'd like to throw the floor open. Flip the slide.
Yeah, go.
And I think preference is given to students, and please state your name, not name, rank, and serial number, but name, major, and what year you are. Okay, front row. We promised them. Okay, somebody already has the mic.
Hello.
Okay.
He shot his hand up first. So he's back there with Solomon. There he is.
Everybody needs a mic. Yeah.
Madam, I'm.
And tell us who you are.
I'm Venkat Ramaraju from India as a visiting scholar. I would like to ask concern to my country as well as a concern for all the world. major losses in the system is distribution losses.
Yeah.
Where a regional grid is very much important, it has a major role and in the context of the digitalization of the distribution and transmission. So what is the Siemens as contributing in this part to reduce the energy losses, indirectly contributing to decarbonization?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. And there are a number of countries that do have challenges around energy losses. We are working in a number of countries to support the local, either the utility or independent power producers. What we find is being able to simulate the entirety of the energy system allows us that, and then also using smart meters, so being able to use intelligence in our meters, allows us then to be able to pinpoint where those losses are, and then be able to put in place mechanisms to control those losses. It also is a bit of a regulatory requirement in many, or need in many of the geographies, to put in place the right mechanisms to ensure that people are not incentivized to want to encourage those losses as well.
Hello, my name is Ricardo. I'm a freshman. I'm an energy engineering major. And I had actually two really distinct questions. The first one is how Siemens manages to deal with all of the sources of information and work that it deals with, because it deals with medical care, with energy. And the second part is whether how it is to deal with the hero-villain scenario of working with oil and gas and also supporting renewable energy, how that works in a company, because I see that many business nowadays, they face this hatred of like working with oil, but at the same time they support renewables.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you, Ricardo. For the first question, it is a challenge in a company as big as Siemens that has such a breadth of portfolio to be able to manage the information. And at the end of the day, I mean, creating true value out of information, you have to be able to get your arms around it. We manage our business in Siemens in a very structured fashion. So we have very distinct businesses for healthcare, very distinct businesses for energy, for industrial automation, for mobility. We do a lot of electric trains, commuter trains. So we manage in a very distinct fashion. What we're trying to do with our digital platform is allow us then to work across those different areas of business to leverage learnings and how do we use data to create value in the business. So up to this point, we've been quite, you could say, almost siloed with respect to how we manage. What we find is that does not allow us to share where there are best practices or knowledge from one industry to another. And we are leveraging now the digital platforms to be able to do that. So that's one way. And what I would also add is if you look at oil and gas, for example, oil and gas is one of the least digitalized of all the industries. So this is one of those industries that has a ton of data. If you look at all the data that's captured to simulate reservoirs, but it does not leverage that data very effectively. If you look at other industries like automotive is well down the path of automating and being able to leverage data all the way from design through to operation of the end product. So what we can do now is try and leverage the learnings from automation through our digital activities into oil and gas to help oil and gas up the learning curve of digital in a much faster fashion. So we're trying to work across to do that. Your second question. Oh, the hero villain. Yeah, so I've worked in oil and gas for a good amount of my career, so I guess that would be the villain world, right? And I have to say, I mean, oil and gas, I found I'm a chemical engineer, so I found oil and gas a very interesting business. What I see now is a lot of, as I mentioned in the talk, a lot of move to renewables. For Siemens, we are the leading company in offshore wind, so we produce the most power in offshore wind. So we're leading in technology development. What I find exciting is that the colleagues in oil and gas are very keen to find ways to reduce emissions, to find ways to be more efficient. And so I think the environment in oil and gas of the past, where there wasn't as much of a desire or acknowledgement of the need to reduce CO2, just in my time, I've seen that change significantly. And now you see a lot of the oil and gas companies, as you said, embracing renewables. Basically, I think seeing the message that the world is changing and this is an expectation in our energy systems of the future. I think the challenge we have is that if you look at the demand for energy in the world, we will have to use fossil fuels for a while longer. We do not have the ability now to completely go to renewables. So what our jobs are is figuring out the way to do that as efficiently as we can. And that's what we're trying to do by shifting more to natural gas fired, natural gas being the lowest CO2 of fossil fuels. And natural gas in combination with renewables can create a very stable and efficient energy system until we find ways to move to higher percentages of renewables. So it's trying to work between the two.
Hi, sorry. I'm Santiago. I'm a graduate student in engineering. In the whole discussion about data and digitization, I guess I have the question of who owns the data, because when I look at the energy chain, if you will, there's many different players that are interacting that are not necessarily under one umbrella. So you might be providing the equipment, then there's the consumer, then there's the utility, then there's the local government. And if you really want to connect many of those dots and improve efficiency on the demand side and the generation side, I think there needs to be some sharing, and maybe that's, I don't know, I just want to get your perspective on data ownership and sharing.
I mean, it's a very good point, and there's a lot of discussion in industry about who owns the data. Obviously, as a customer, a utility, for example, they feel they own the data, and if I were in their business, I would own the data as well. And oil and gas companies, they all want to own their own data as well. So there's a reluctance to share data, not so much from companies like Siemens, but more so from the true end consumer. And what we're trying to do, and I think many in the industry are trying to do, is create very open platforms, make sure that there's high level of security on those platforms, and then in that way allow the customer to still own the data. We create the environment in which to share that data as desired, and also to leverage that data with tools to create value. So our view from a Siemens perspective is we don't own the data. We own maybe the data for facilities we operate and own, but that's because we're kind of the customer. But everywhere else, our customers own the data, and we create an environment where they can get more value out of their data. And I think most of industry is going that way.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks for the talk. My name is Lucas Spanger. I'm a first-year PhD student in EECS. I think often about climate change, but also I think about wealth inequality. And I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on how the new energy mix might affect that. I mean, as you know, previously we had a bunch of centralized players, the owners of large power plants. Specifically, I want to talk about, in your slide, you mentioned a move to 33% decentralized. And so many people have claimed that that's going to move a shift towards smaller players. I'm a little skeptical. I think that we heard similar things when Lyft and Uber came around, and instead, I think they basically represent a lateral move in terms of consolidation. We still have large economic players. So I'm just curious to see what you think, whether this will help or hurt wealth inequality.
Yeah, I honestly think it will, and I say that because I mean, I've seen in the business where we have a lot of new players in the energy business, independent power producers, consortiums, a lot of different types of customers and power generators that are getting much more involved, and partly because the world is going much more decentralized. I see today that at least 50% of the projects that we work on, at least 50%, are in smaller sources of generation, microgrids, isolated systems, in geographies where they don't have access to a grid. So to me, that does help from a wealth and prosperity, because you're able to now bring more affordable systems of energy to geographies that didn't have it before. We do a lot of business in Africa in that fashion. So I do see that. I do see the system changing in that sense, and a lot more participation, a lot more smaller systems, partly also because people want more flexibility. They don't want to have to rely on large power generators, the utilities. That doesn't say the utility model goes away. I still see that there's very much a need for large-scale power generation in densely populated areas, but the growth is really in decentralized.
Hi, my name is Oriane. I'm a graduate student from the College of Engineering. You mentioned that you were using blockchain to develop a peer-to-peer market of energy. And could you please tell us a little bit more, like how Siemens is involved in that?
Yeah, we're actually, I mean, this is obviously a field that's developing quite quickly. And we're working at it in two different ways. The example I had there is we have a microgrid environment in, I think that was in New York, where we're trying to leverage, where we've got a number of different consumers and producers in a microgrid, and we're then leveraging blockchain to allow them to transact business. So that's one that's still being developed. We also have a group within Siemens that we've just recently set up about a year ago, that we have tasked with finding these new business models and finding disruptive ways or changes to our traditional business models in the company. And one area that they're exploring and looking at different startups and how to learn more about blockchain or about new technologies is in the blockchain area. They're also looking at areas like artificial intelligence, autonomous mobility. So they're really trying to figure out how do we leverage now the capability that blockchain offers in our traditional businesses, and we have a few of those pilots going.
My name is Davis, and I'm a chemistry student here. I was wondering, so you...
College of Chemistry.
Yeah.
Good job.
You showed the projections for the energy percentages by 2040, and although the growth is in renewables, it's still even a growth in the carbon-based fuel for energy generation. And as I understand it, that's as like kind of a consistent backbone to the system of some sort. So I was wondering what sort of steps you're taking and what sort of technologies you're looking at to replace that consistent backbone in an actually decarbonized
Yeah,
situation.
I mean, what we're finding is that, and there's a number of different markets around the world that have gone to a very high percentage of renewables and very much de-emphasize the more traditional backbone, and in that case, natural gas-fired power generation. And in doing so, they end up with so much instability in the grid, the system isn't manageable. So until we find technology for storage that can supplement the volatility of the grid and allow for the variability that renewables brings into a grid without having to have the backup capacity in traditional fossil, then until we have that energy, that storage capability, I don't think we'll be able to get away from the traditional power generation. Now, there's a lot of work being done in probably here in Berkeley as well in storage, whether it be more residential type applications, more industrial type applications, the duration of storage, the efficiency of the media. So I think at some point that energy technology or the storage technology will come through, and then at that point you'll see a lesser percentage of the traditional fossil. Now, it also takes a long time to change the backbone, right? And we can build renewables fairly quickly. They're a shorter time frame in terms of the projects, but still the bulk of the energy system today is in fossil. And so it'll take a while to transition to higher percentages of renewables. Battery technology will help to do that, or storage technology will help to do that.
Hi, my name is Sam Roth. I'm a first-year MBA student at the Haas School. My question is piggybacking off of these is like, I think we know that it's shifting, right? But how do you foresee increasing the rate of change and increasing the rate of adoption? Obviously, there's some older players in the market, more traditional companies, which may not be willing to give up their position, who have stronger holds in fossil fuel generation. And I mean, do you see a shift in the way utilities operate, in the way oil and gas companies operate? Do you think they're going to start owning these like battery systems? And related to that, it's like, are we moving too slowly? And does that keep you up at night, or?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it's a great question. How do we move faster? If I look at just my past, I mean, I've been with Siemens now for 3 years, and so very involved in, for example, renewables, and how we're bringing new technologies to the market. We have moved so quickly in bringing new technology to the market that if you look at offshore wind, for example, the price point has reduced from over 100 cents a kilowatt hour now down to 4. So to me, the way that you transition the energy system in a faster way is to make sure that the technologies that are offered are cost competitive. Because at the end of the day, what I see in energy systems is it's an economic decision. I mean, our society, we all want to go to lower CO2, but at the end of the day, many of the choices are made on economic bases. The data I showed you there around solar being 3 cents a kilowatt hour, wind now being 4 to 5 cents a kilowatt hour, that's very competitive with natural gas-fired power generation. So now when a company approaches, or an independent power producer, or a government wants to put in additional power generation capacity, the economics support going to renewables, just as in the past they more effectively supported staying with fossil. So I think that's the best way to transition the system is through technology that allows us to be more efficient, to be more competitive, and to make the right economic choices as well.
Hi, my name is Kate. I majored in physics when I went to school here. My question is also adding to these, because I don't think that like 34% is enough.
No.
And I guess, so storage is useful. So everyone working on storage, keep it up. And I agree with your response about in terms of the economy and like driving things. But to be honest, as like a young person making our way in the world, with an administration that we have nationally, how, like, is the economy enough? How does politics get involved? And how do we push that 34 to 54 by 2035 in order to actually, we have to do it. It's like not even a question.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, what we show here for, I think it was 30 some odd % in 2040 is if you look at plans around the world in different countries as to how they expect to introduce renewables. For example, Morocco has a target to introduce, to get to 52% renewables in a fairly short amount of time. I think 2020, 2025, something like that. So there are some very aggressive plans out there. But it's still then a matter of how do we bring the technologies, how do we make sure, even if the technology isn't quite as competitive as fossil, a lot of countries are putting in regulatory support, they're putting in incentives to drive the adoption of renewables until technology can catch up. So you see a lot of growth in renewables through the implementation. You see it here in the US, we have the PTC for wind, which is an incentive system that encourages wind power generation. So to me, it's a combination of really universities and companies like Siemens working together to develop new technologies. It's a combination of governments providing the right incentives or regulatory environment that enables new forms of energy to be competitive and come to the marketplace. And it's also a matter of companies like our traditional oil and gas companies starting to embrace the renewables business. And to the question here as well, there are, if you look at a lot of what companies like Shell, BP, Total are all doing, they are trying to find ways to invest now in new energies. And those new energies are predominantly renewables, and they're actually becoming developers. Shell, for example, is becoming a developer of wind parks. So they will invest money. They don't have the technology to provide, you know, the equipment that's required to generate power with wind, but they're investing money to develop the parks. So the different projects around the world. They're also working from a technology perspective on areas like how to integrate more in the energy in the value chain. They're looking at, obviously, areas like CO2 storage and capture. In Siemens, we're looking at, even if you have natural gas-fired power generation, how do you capture the CO2 out of that? So even if natural gas has to remain a part of the backbone of energy for at least a while, how do we make it even cleaner than it already is? So there's a tremendous amount of work, but it requires a collaboration across all of those areas to even make the pace of change that's already being made, let alone even more. So to me, it's not one single answer. It's a lot of effort on a lot of parts.
Over here.
Hi, thank you for a wonderful talk. Kostas Panos, CECS and Director of CITRIS. It has been said that the most decarbonized kilowatt hour is the one that you do not have to produce and distribute, because you do not get to waste it in inefficient buildings, transportations, and industrial processes. So can you comment on how, when we talk about energy systems, we include energy efficiency and consumption?
Excellent, very, very good. Thank you for the point. When I talk about the energy system, I'm going all the way to consumption. So this is very important. And I will have to say, we see in the world today a very strong growth in focus on energy efficiency. Even if you look at some countries where, for example, very fossil-based countries where the price of fossil fuels is quite low, there's still a very strong emphasis on energy efficiency. And I'll just give you an example. For example, Saudi Arabia, obviously a very strong oil and gas country, historically has built a tremendous amount of power generation capacity because there's very little focus on energy efficiency. But now with the world changing in energy, and there's not as much value in the energy value chain because the price of oil and natural gas is so low, even countries like Saudi Arabia are focusing on a tremendous amount on energy efficiency, to the point now where they have canceled all of their forward projects to generate more electricity. So they are not building more power plants. They're managing their energy efficiency, their consumption, and they're also now asking companies like Siemens to help them repower existing plants that may be 10, 15, 20 years old that are very low in efficiency, to get those to be more efficient. So you see a lot of drive on efficiency. From a Siemens perspective, we have a business called Building Technologies. And our building technologies business focuses on working with building owners to identify ways to optimize the management of their assets, their buildings, energy efficiency, control systems, whatever the case may be. So it's a very, very big market and strong focus in the business today. So it actually surprised me. When I see countries like Saudi doing as much as they are around energy efficiency, it's like, well, this is good, you know, so.
I think this is going to have to be our last question, but perhaps at the 4 o'clock reception, some of the rest of the Siemens team. Kurt has been volunteered to come back at 4 o'clock and get the rest of your questions answered.
Kurt and Juan can answer everything.
Good, last question.
There's no pressure.
My name is William Harriet, and I'm an undergraduate nuclear engineering major. And when you looked at the energy projection, nuclear power generally stagnated and didn't see any growth.
Yeah.
Why not? As a clean energy, it seems like it'd still be a very good option.
Yeah, I mean, it is viewed as a very clean energy in the context of what we have here. I don't see, the only places that we see today nuclear plants being built are in China because of the high demand. But nuclear plants are so capital intensive that it's a difficult economic proposition to do a nuclear facility, as well as just the safety concerns and the public image, the public view of nuclear facilities. But from an economic perspective, it's just the capital intensity that makes it difficult. If you compare that to a gas-fired turbine power, or even to wind, it's much cheaper.
Lisa, this has been a fantastic afternoon, and I have to say your message of digital transformation of society, digitalization, I think it's a message that has really resonated, and I sort of picked on Kostas because in CITRIS, he's made this digital transformation of society really a big theme of where he's taking it. So it has social questions, security, privacy. So we very much resonate with your message. Just personal standpoint, I'm not allowed to ask questions, as you know.
That's good.
It's been a fascinating hour with you, and we knew it would be. So thank you for coming out here. Please join me for thanking Lisa for joining us today. There were more questions from the energy engineering majors and so on. So we have to volunteer Kurt Bettenhaus to answer them, and there will be this reception at 4 o'clock. out here, just in the lobby outside. So, thank you. Okay, and I'm now delighted to present you with a small token of appreciation, confirming your status as Berkeley engineer.
That's very nice. Thank you very much.
I think they need a picture of you with Tiffany. Thank you, and go there!
Yeah, there we go.